The UFC is heading back to the Apex for their Fight Night card on April 5th, and as someone who's not super high on these Apex cards, I actually think this one is pretty interesting. There's a really strong main event between Josh Emmett and Lerone Murphy, and I think there are some really fun fights sprinkled throughout the card, especially in some of the lighter men's weight classes. But in this video, I'm going to be going through my full card predictions, main card, and the prelims. They're going to be timestamps in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific matchups. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. If you agree, disagree, let me hear it. But let's just dive right into the first matchup here. We have Vanessa Demopoulos taking on Talita Alencar. Now, neither of these women are world beaters. You look at Demopoulos' UFC record, 5-3 in their promotion. You're probably thinking she's pretty solid, above average fighter. She has 3 decision wins that have been very, very generous to her. The wins against Cody, Murata, Frey. And I'm not even saying like these are close decisions, could have gone either way. I think all 3 of those decisions could be, classified as robberies. Like you look at MMAdecisions.com where they have the media scorecards. Like I'm talking she won maybe 1 scorecard out of like 15 media members. To get 1 of those in your career is fairly rare. We're just like, it's a complete robbery. But to have 3 in 8 total UFC fights is kind of crazy. So her current record's 5-3. I think she's a lot closer and probably should be, 2-6 at this point in the UFC. Now, I will say, in terms of optics for judges, she does do a good job pushing a pace. She's typically the aggressor on the feet, which shouldn't really matter if she's getting outlanded, but clearly the judges like it with her getting, 3 pretty questionable decisions. She has been outstruck in all but 1 of her UFC fights. She struggles to initiate her own grappling, only 11% takedown accuracy, and then she also struggles to defend takedowns, only a 27% takedown accuracy throughout her UFC career. So I think the numbers, the close decisions, or really not even the close decisions, I think the 5-3 record is pretty misleading. On the other side for Alencar, she's even less proven than Demopoulos. She's 1-1 in the UFC. I think her win was also a pretty controversial decision. It was a split, probably should have gone the other way. And then she has a very clear loss to Stephanie Luciano, where they actually had a draw in the Contender Series. They rematched in the UFC, and Luciano just blew her out of the water in the rematch. She is someone who's going to go out, Alencar is, and is going to be desperate to grapple. 3 of her 5 wins are by submission. She does have pretty solid control if she can land the takedown, but her wrestling is not good. In her 2 UFC fights, she has gone 1 for 9 and 1 for 10 on takedowns. So she is going to continue shooting. She is going to be relentless. And if she finds the takedown, she can rack up control time. But the problem is she's not finding a lot of takedowns to get that control time. But this is kind of a weird matchup because we have someone who's going to want to grapple, is going to, relentlessly wrestle, potentially unsuccessfully, but you have that person going up against someone who has pretty bad wrestling defense. So you have a bad wrestler trying to wrestle with someone who is not good at wrestling. I slightly lean towards Alencar here. We have seen Demopoulos get taken down and get controlled in multiple fights in the UFC. I think that is the path to victory for Alencar. So I'm going to pick her by decision, but it would not shock me if this is a very close, potential controversial decision, but Alencar by decision will be my pick. Then moving over to a bantamweight matchup, we have Victor Henry taking on Pedro Falcao. Victor Henry's UFC run has kind of been a little bit disappointing. He had an amazing debut against Raoni Barcelos. I think people do respect Raoni Barcelos now, after the Peyton Talbot upset win. But at the time, a few years ago, Raoni Barcelos was viewed as a top prospect. He was 5-1 in the UFC, had some quality wins, and Victor Henry went out in his UFC debut, I think it was short notice, and just put it on Raoni, won a clear, dominant decision, and the UFC really kind of pushed him after that. His next fight was against a ranked Rafael Assunção, and Victor Henry was a -400 favorite, so a 4-1 favorite going into that matchup, and he lost a decision. Since then, he picked up a split decision win against Tony Gravely. He had the no contest where he got pretty brutally kicked in the nuts by Javid Basharat, but wasn't looking great in that fight. He has a KO win against Ronnie Yaya, and then he was subbed by Charles Jourdain. So it's not like he's gone on some sort of long losing streak, but I think people expected him to really make noise in the weight class, and that hasn't really happened. He also is aging, especially in terms of lighter weight classes. He's 37 years old. You're not seeing a ton of guys at that age, still performing at a high level. He does have a fun, well-rounded skill set Within the UFC, he's been more of a striker, really before he started to wrestle Jordan in that most recent fight, but did engage in the grappling more before he got into the UFC. On the other side with Falcao here, this is his second UFC fight. He lost the first one by decision to Victor Hugo. On the regional scene, very solid grappler, 6 wins by knockout, 5 by submission. Got in on the Contender Series where he had a very dominant grappling win. In his UFC debut, the wrestling was struggling, 1 for 13 on takedown attempts. You look at Victor Henry, in the UFC, he has been very good at stuffing shots. He has an 84% takedown defense. He's not super easy to get down, and he's not all that easy to hold down. I also think, even though we haven't seen it a ton in the UFC, I do think he has submission skills to threaten if you do want to engage him in the grappling. So I'm going to lean towards Victor Henry here. Maybe his career has been a little bit underwhelming in the UFC, but I still think he has enough to get it done in this matchup by decision. Then we're going to have Loma Lookboonmee taking on Istela Nunes. And on paper, this looks like a pretty significant mismatch here. I think Loma's legitimately good. She's 6-2 in the UFC. Some decent names on her resume. Wins against Sam Hughes, Bruna Brazil, Denise Gomes, Elise Reed. On the other side, Istela Nunes is 0-4 in the UFC. So 6-2 versus 0-4 certainly looks like a mismatch. Believe this was originally supposed to be Ariane Carnelossi. Istela Nunes steps in. I guess it kind of keeps her in the UFC here. But for Loma, she's primarily a striker, does kind of mix in the takedowns, sometimes to her own detriment. Like, I think sometimes she'd be better off just staying on the feet, not trying to mix it up. But I at least like the effort that she's, trying to mix things up. For Istela Nunes here, she is 0-4, which is obviously a very tough record. But I do think she's better than the 0-4 would lead you to believe. Like, she's having moments in her fights. Her first fight, she was submitted in the 3rd round, but was very competitive in the first 2. It's not like she was getting blown out of the water. Second fight, had a really nice round 1 against Sam Hughes, but as we've seen in a lot of Sam Hughes fights, she turns on the gas and, ends up winning the 2nd and the 3rd, so she loses that fight. Third fight, she rocked Yasmin Jauregui bad in the 1st round, couldn't find the finish, then got finished herself in the 2nd. And then her 4th fight got taken down and landed weird, dislocated her elbow. Very gross, and so never really got a shot in that one. I think she's a decent striker. She does have some grappling deficiencies like we've seen, and she also doesn't have the best cardio, can kind of tend to gas. So I just think Loma's the better fighter here. I think she picks up the win by decision. Then moving up in weight, we have a men's matchup between Rhys McKee and Daniel Frunza. It's just tough to side with Rhys McKee at this point. He's 0-4 in the UFC across 2 separate stints. He started off 0-2 in his first stint, got released, went to Cage Warriors, won a title, picked up some wins, came back in, and is now 0-2 since rejoining. And he's just been pretty outclassed in every fight and in pretty much every area. He's been outstruck and outgrappled in pretty much every matchup. Now he's faced some tough guys. Obviously the Khamzat Chimaev fight, I think that was his UFC debut. That's brutal. He also faced Chidi and Jokuani, I think, in his second fight in this second stint, which is definitely a tough matchup. Someone who's, flirting with top 15 in the weight class. And then guys like Alex Morono, Ange Lusa, just across the board, no matter what the competition has looked like, he's not looked great. Now, outside the UFC, he has had a lot of finishing upside. He has a 100% finish rate, 10 knockouts, 3 submission wins. So potentially dangerous. We just haven't really seen it in the UFC yet. On the other side with Frunza, this is his UFC debut, coming off the Contender Series. He is a dangerous striker. 8 of his 9 wins are by knockout. Very powerful. Had a nasty last-second elbow KO in his final fight in LFA. He has been submitted in his 2 losses, so potential grappling deficiency there. Although I will say the most recent one, it was a club and sub, so he got rocked on the feet, hit the deck, and then the dude just jumped right on his back and, locked in the rear naked choke. So don't know if that's, a severe issue in the grappling department. I'm just going to lean towards Frunza here. We've seen, what we've seen out of Rhys McKee, and it hasn't been great. Frunza's a little bit more of the wild card, but we at least, have some upside there. So I'm going to go with Frunza by round 2 knockout. If he's picking up a win, he's probably outstriking him, doing some damage. I think he finds the finish in the 2nd round. Then we are going to have Dione Barbosa taking on Diana Belbita. This kind of looks like a mismatch on paper. Barbosa's looked fine in her first 2 UFC fights. She's 1-1, got into the UFC with a submission win on the Contender Series. Someone who's primarily going to go out there and want to grapple. Belbita is 2-5 in the UFC. She has been out-grappled in all 7 of her UFC fights. So even the ones where she's winning, she's still getting out-grappled. She's been submitted twice, and then she's been control-grappled in the other 5. And then you look at the 2 wins. She's 2-5. Those 2 wins have a combined UFC record of 2-7. So she's really just beating the bottom of the barrel, and then she's losing to anyone else. I'm going to go with Barbosa by decision. If she found a submission, I wouldn't be shocked, but expect this to be probably like a grinded out, control grappled performance from Barbosa. Then in one of the most fun matchups on this card, we have Davey Grant taking on Daniel Santos. I think this one should be on the main card just in terms of like entertainment value. At 39 years old, Davey Grant just continues to perform and put together some really nice performances. He has won 3 of his last 4. In my opinion, it should be 4 of his last 4. I thought he definitely won the fight against Daniel Marcos, who is still undefeated, so that would have been a great win on his resume. In the UFC, he's transitioned to pretty much like purely a striker. He has landed 0 takedowns in his last 5 fights, but he does still have very good jiu-jitsu. He has 7 career wins by submission. He had an inverted triangle like late in the 3rd round in a fight he was losing against Rafael Assunção after rocking him with a spinning back fist. So he does have the jiu-jitsu, but he's not someone who's going to go out there and try to wrestle super offensively. He's a very unique striker and is pretty different from the waist up compared to the waist down. When you look at his kicks, he throws a variety of different kicks. They're super sharp, super technical. Then up top, he kind of throws like these big looping hooks. And it's just kind of a weird like contrast where down low, he's like super sharp, super clean, super efficient. And then up top, he's just like winging these huge punches. But he is kind of an awkward guy to prepare for. He does carry his power late into fights. He has a very good chin. He's been dropped a few times in the UFC, but has never been knocked out in his pro career. On the other side here with Daniel Santos, he is very fun. He's 11-2 as a pro, 2-1 in the UFC. He fights at a very, very high pace. He's durable. He's never been knocked out. If you have some time, I highly recommend watching his fight against John Castaneda. This was a few years ago. He weathered a very early storm against Castaneda. I think he got dropped, rocked like 2-3 times in that fight, was able to recover, and just never laid off the gas. He never got tentative, just continued to put it on Castaneda, and then ended up finishing him in the 2nd round after he kind of gassed himself out. He has great kicks, works the body well, solid ground game. The one issue here for Santos has just been the inactivity. His last fight was in June of 2023. He's fought 3 times in the last 5 years. He has 3 UFC fights, and he has pulled out of 4 UFC fights. So he has pulled out of more fights than he has actually participated in. That's tough because you have the combination of potential ring rust and then also the fact that he might not be the same guy athletically once he is back in there. So I'm going to lean towards Davey Grant. I do think he's the underdog in this matchup, but he's been beating some higher level guys. I think he's a tough guy to prepare for in the striking department. He's someone who has pretty good cardio, also dangerous enough where you can't just like recklessly push a pace against him. So I'm going to go with Davey Grant by decision, but I do think this fight has potential fight of the night written all over it. Then another interesting matchup in the lower weight classes, we have Luis Gurule taking on Osbourne. This is a flyweight matchup. Gurule is making his UFC debut. He's just overall a really solid fighter, very composed on the feet, not going to overextend, has clean boxing, mixes up his targets well. He's a collegiate wrestler, but did actually get out-wrestled in his Contender Series fight, ended up winning that one with the striking. I don't think at the UFC level he's going to be a big finishing threat. Just doesn't have a ton of explosion, not overly powerful, especially at the highest level. On the other side here for Osbourne, he's probably fighting for his job in the UFC. He's 4-6 in the promotion. He's lost 3 straight. I do think he's a great athlete, very quick, very fast, extremely explosive, and he is very dangerous early in fights. First round especially. He has 2 knockout wins in the UFC within a minute and 1 second. He nearly knocked out Lazy Boy in round 1 on the Sphere card in his most recent fight. He does have some grappling deficiencies. He's been submitted in 4 of his 8 losses. He's also been knocked out twice in the UFC. So durability-wise, not great. He's getting finished both by knockout and submission. I think round 1 is going to be very dangerous for Gurule. I think there's going to be a major difference in the athleticism and the explosiveness of these guys. But I do think that if Gurule can survive that round 1, he's going to start to take over round 2, round 3 once Osbourne is not as fresh. So I am going to lean towards Gurule by decision. If he got nuked in round 1, it wouldn't be shocking to me, but I do think he can weather the early storm and end up picking up a decision win. Up next, we have a middleweight matchup between Robert Valentin and Torrez Finney. I think this is an interesting stylistic matchup. Valentin's pretty well-rounded. He does have power on the feet, but I think he's probably even more dangerous on the ground. He has 3 knockout wins, 6 submission wins, only won a decision 1 time. He competed on the Ultimate Fighter recently, 2 finishes on Tough. In the finale, he ended up getting out-grappled and finished, so like his technical UFC debut, like the one that actually counts on the pro record, but had 2 impressive finishes, then just like got out-grappled. And, a fight that was competitive in the first round, but kind of faded, got put in a crucifix, ended up getting finished there. On the other side for Finney, just happy to see him in the UFC. I think he was the first and still the only guy to win 3 times on the Contender Series. There are just like these weird examples where like maybe Dana will be in like a bad mood or he just won't like a dude. And like at this point, if we're being real with each other, like if you win on the Contender Series, as long as the fight wasn't incredibly boring, like you're getting a contract. It's not like a super high bar you have to hit. But for whatever reason, he just did not like Torrez Finney. I mean, he got a finish in his first Contender Series fight, didn't get picked up, won a decision on the second one, didn't get picked up. They brought him back again, got another finish, and now he's in the UFC. He is 10-0 as a pro, has suffocating grappling, 7 wins by knockout. The vast majority of those are just ground and pound KOs, and then a submission. He is pretty much controlled like nearly every second of his Contender Series fights. He really is just relentless with his wrestling. There is going to be an extreme difference in frames between these guys. Valentin is like pretty big for middleweight, 6'2", 77-inch reach. Torrez Finney is built like just a freaking tank. The man's only 5'8", so 5'8" at middleweight is very, very small. He has very long arms for his size with a 75.5-inch reach, but I mean, the dude is literally just built like a truck, as you can see here on the screen. I do think if this is just a pure standing battle, that Valentin is going to be the better striker, but I just think Torrez Finney's physicality, his just relentlessness as a grappler is going to carry him in this matchup. I think Valentin might be fine getting grappled because he can kind of work his submission game, but I just think it's going to be tough to submit a guy who's as powerful as Finney. I mean, his frame, I don't know how you're submitting that dude's neck. Like, his neck is like as big as most people's thighs. And so I just think he's going to put a pace on. We saw Valentin kind of fade when he had to consistently grapple in the fight against Ryan Loder for the Tough finale. So I'm going to go with Torrez Finney here. I think he finds a ground and pound KO in the second round. Now we're going to have Gerald Meerschaert taking on Brad Tavares, sticking around in the middleweight weight class. 2 UFC veterans here. Gerald Meerschaert has great offensive jiu-jitsu. He has 7 UFC submission wins. That is 4th in UFC history. That is 1st in the middleweight weight class. He has finished 35 of his 37 wins, which is a super impressive finish rate, especially with how long he's been in the UFC. And then he has been finished in 13 of his 18 losses. So he's pretty much the definition of killer be killed. He does kind of struggle to wrestle to set up that submission offense. This is something we see, with certain fighters where they have the great jiu-jitsu, but they don't necessarily have the tools to consistently get the fight to the ground. He only has a 35% takedown accuracy, but if he can get you down, whether that's with a takedown or you slipping on a banana peel, falling, whatever it is, he is very, very dangerous if he can get you there. As you can probably tell from getting finished in 13 out of 18 losses, he's not the most durable guy. Now on the other side with Brad Tavares, he's a 25-fight UFC veteran. He has gone 15-10 in the promotion, but he's struggled as of late. He has lost 4 of his last 5. He's a striker, doesn't have a ton of finishing upside in his 15 UFC wins. 13 of them are by decision, but he does have very, very good takedown defense, 80%. Now he has been taken down twice in back-to-back fights, but those have been against more physically dominant wrestlers, RoboCop, Iron Turtle. I just think this is a bad matchup for Gerald Meerschaert. I think Tavares is going to be patient. Don't think he's going to overextend himself on the feet. He does have that very good takedown defense, and I think this is going to be the one kind of like rare fight where Gerald Meerschaert's actually going to decision. So I'm going to go with Brad Tavares to win this one by decision. I think he just picks him apart from the outside, outstrikes him. I think maybe he gets clinched for a little bit, but I don't think he's going to get taken and held down. If he does get taken down, then Meerschaert's always live for a finish. But I think Tavares keeps this one standing and wins a decision. Now we are going to go up to heavyweight, where we have Kennedy and Nzechukwu taking on Martin Buday. And I think Kennedy is going to be a real problem at heavyweight. He's 2-0 since moving up. KO wins against Chris Barnett and Lucas Brzeski. Now, for being honest, towards the bottom of the barrel in terms of like, legit guys at heavyweight, but he's not one of these dudes moving up from 205 that's like just doing it because he's lazy, wants to be fat, doesn't want to train as hard. He's more in like the Jailton Almeida camp where it's like super physically gifted, probably thinks it's easier to just beat up on some of these heavyweights because like outside the top 5, the weight class is just awful because he has a big frame, 6'5", 83-inch reach. He's coming in between like 235 and 240. Maybe he'll continue to put on weight, but like he's not one of these guys that's trying to push like the 265-pound limit. He'll fight with a weight disadvantage and still be fine. He is going to have an extreme athleticism advantage in this matchup. He's a powerful striker. 10 of his 14 wins are by knockout. He can at times be a little bit too patient. We saw in his loss against OSP, he was a huge favorite in that fight, had all the physical tools to beat him and just didn't have, enough of an output. Even the Carlos Ulberg fight where he came back and won, he was pretty much just like operating as a punching bag for the first half of that fight. And then Ulberg gassed himself out and then he found the finish. I do think at heavyweight it matters less though, because you're just not going to have guys putting a ton of output on you. Like Martin Buday isn't going to be some high volume striker. Buday is 5-1 in the UFC. Solid record. You think he'd be pretty good. He has faced some of the worst, comp I've seen at heavyweight. It's pretty much like they just lined up like the 5 worst heavyweights you could find and they gave him to Buday. His wins are against Josh Parisian, Jake Collier, Chris Barnett. I do like Chris Barnett. Don't want to slander the man. He's extremely fun, but like in terms of high-level heavyweight fighters, that is not him. And then guys like Arlovsky and Lucas Brzeski, like Buday is winning very competitive, controversial split decisions against those guys. Obviously, Arlovsky, former champion, but the current form of him in the last 5 years is nowhere close to the guy that we saw when he was holding the belt. And then the one time he gets a real opponent in Shamil Gaziev, he gets knocked out. So Buday is primarily a striker, only landed 1 takedown in the UFC. He's a big dude, 6'4", 77-inch reach. He's a guy who's going to cut down to that 265-pound limit. I just think Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to be better. I think he's the more dangerous fighter. I don't think he's going to get clipped by Buday. I don't think he's going to get ragdolled. I just think he's going to be too mobile. I'm going to pick Kennedy Nzechukwu by round 2 knockout. Think round 1, kind of picking at him, feeling out process. Think he goes out there and gets the finish in the second round. Moving way down to bantamweight, we have Cortavious Romious taking on Chang Ho Lee. I think this should be a fun, competitive fight. Both these guys want to grapple, but neither of them are like so overly dominant where they can just take a dude down and hold them down for the entire round. I think this fight is going to be prone to a lot of fun scrambles, and I think that could make this one pretty entertaining. Starting off here with Romious, he is very short for bantamweight. He's only 5'4", but he's built like a tank. He's jacked. He's very explosive, powerful body kicks, big slams once he can get, close to you. He really is someone who's going to go out there and force his style of fight. He's going to try to push a pace. He's going to, grapple you relentlessly. The problem is he doesn't necessarily like dominate within his own ideal style. We saw in his UFC debut was going up against Bolaños, who is known as a striker, and he kind of like lost at his own game against someone who, doesn't like that style of fight. So not a great sign there. For Chang Ho Lee, he came into the UFC through the road to the UFC, had 2 finishes leading up to the finale. On the final, won a split decision win. Lee is a dog. He is also a relentless grappler, has very good cardio. We've seen him come back in fights and find finishes. Solid ground and pound, which I do think could be a difference in this matchup. I'm expecting a grappling heavy fight. I think both guys are going to have their moments. I think this could be a fight where Romious might land a takedown. Lee might reverse him. They're going to be going back and forth in terms of, who are winning the minutes. But I trust Lee's cardio a little bit more than I do Romious, and I also trust his ability to land ground and pound. This is what we saw in the Bolaños fight, where Romious was racking up control time, but he wasn't really capitalizing by actually landing that ground and pound. He was more so attacking potential submissions. And if you get the submission, it's great. But if you don't, you're kind of just holding the guy. You're not getting a lot of benefit on the scorecards. And then when the other guy gets in his positions and he's not worried about a submission, he's just dealing damage, they are going to win that round. So I think that's where Chang Ho Lee is going to get the edge in this matchup, and I'm going to pick him by decision. Then I think we've arrived at the co-main event where we have Joanderson Brito taking on Pat Sabatini. This is a really fun matchup here. Brito in his last fight, coming off a questionable split decision loss to William Gomi. In his 4 fights before that, he had 4 straight finishes in the UFC, 2 knockouts, 2 submissions. Brito is extremely explosive. He hits really hard, has great jiu-jitsu. In his pro career, he has 7 wins by knockout, 8 by submission, 2 by decision. On the other side with Pat Sabatini, he is a great grappler. 13 of his 19 wins are by submission. He has gone 6-2 in the UFC. He has 3 submission wins over Jonathan Pierce, Lucas Almeida, Jamal Emmers. Like, not bad competition to be submitting. And then in his 3 other wins, he has racked up at least 7.5 minutes of control time. So when he's winning, he's either submitting you or he is controlling you for at least half of the fight. I do think he has some durability concerns. In his 2 losses, he has been knocked out. Diego Lopez, Damon Jackson. Diego Lopez, not going to ding you too much for that. Diego hits like a truck, has pretty much run through everyone. Damon Jackson, though, someone who is not at all known for having a ton of knockout power. The fact that he put Pat Sabatini down, not a great sign. I do think in this matchup, Joanderson Brito is going to be so much more dangerous. He can really end fights at any point. I think on the other side, though, for Pat Sabatini, I think he does have the skill set to control grapple Joanderson Brito. We have seen him get taken down, and he can get held down. He can get controlled in these matchups, and you don't want to be, getting controlled by Pat Sabatini. You do not want to have him on your back. So that is kind of a concern here for Joanderson Brito. I am going to side with Brito, though. I think he is going to find a knockout. I'll go round 1 KO. I just think he's shown that he just needs a moment to be able to win a fight. Even in the Jonathan Pierce matchup, right? He's getting control grappled. He gets loose for a second and he's, locking in a submission. I think it could be a submission. I think it could be a knockout. I do lean towards a knockout though, and I think it happens in round 1. And then we have arrived at the main event, Josh Emmett taking on Lerone Murphy. This is a veteran versus prospect matchup here, a very solid main event. And in Josh Emmett's last fight, it was the Bryce Mitchell knockout. Long time ago, December of 2023. Not ideal, right? Because it seemed like he could build some momentum on that win. Now he's 40 years old, coming off a year-plus layoff. We know he has that nuclear power. He's very boxing heavy, pretty durable also, very tough fighter. He's someone who doesn't typically look to wrestle. I do think he has that skill set, but he doesn't go to it a ton. Also not someone who's going to get taken down super easily. Only been taken down 8 times in his 14 UFC fights. On the other side with Lerone Murphy, he is 15-0-1 as a pro. He is 7-0-1 in the UFC. Just an all-around, very, very good fighter, technically sound. He's primarily a striker, willing to mix in the grappling, though, if he wants. Defensively responsible. Not that he can't get hurt. He has been dropped a couple of times in the UFC, but he only absorbs 2.67 significant strikes per minute, which is very, very low. I think this is one of those matchups where Murphy is going to win the minutes, but all Josh Emmett needs is one singular moment to potentially put Lerone Murphy's lights out. Kind of like what I talked about with Joanderson Brito and Pat Sabatini, where like Brito just needs a moment. It's a similar thing here with Josh Emmett. We have seen Murphy get dropped, like I mentioned. Contrary, though, to me picking Brito, I am going to go with Lerone Murphy here. I think he has proven to be durable. He just consistently, steps up his level. Every time he gets a step up in competition, he's going out there. He's looking like the better guy. So I'm going to pick Lerone Murphy by decision. If Josh Emmett, found that overhand right, it wouldn't be shocking to me, but it's not like Emmett's a lock to go out there and just nuke someone. We've seen him go 5 rounds, not find that shot, the Calvin Kattar fight, even though he won on the scorecards, thought he should have lost. Like, it's not like he, nuked Calvin Kattar or even hurt him all that badly. So I will lean towards Lerone Murphy. Josh Emmett, always live for a finish. If you are someone who's really rooting for Murphy, you are going to be very nervous for the entire 25 because he's never going to be 100% safe, but I do think he ends up finding the win. So that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Would love to hear your thoughts. You guys agree, disagree with me? Let me know your main card picks down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.